In this video, we're going to look at some basics for valuing bonds. There are a number of different types of corporate debt. There are your traditional bank loans. There are lines of credit, which for corporations are much like yours or mine, credit cards. There's commercial paper. This is negotiable instruments of maturities of less than 270 days. There are short-term notes payable, generally 1 to 2 years in length. And then there are long-term bonds. And long-term bonds are going to be the focus of this video. Let's begin by looking at some basic bond terms. First, we've got most bonds have an annual or a semi-annual coupon. In the case of this bond issued by Walmart, it has a 7% annual coupon, which means it pays a $70 coupon payment each year. That takes the 7% coupon rate, multiplying it by the $1,000 face value. The face value, or par value, is the amount that we'll receive at maturity. If we were to pay, or if the selling price for this bond was currently $1,000, we would say the bond is selling at par, and we would price it out and say it has a 7% yield to maturity. And you can calculate your yield to maturity in this case by using your financial calculator. We'll put 10 in for the number of years. That's the maturity of the bond. It matures in 10 years. That's when we get our face value back, and we've been promised the annual coupon for a 10-year period. So 10 is the life of the bond. We'll put the present value as negative 1,000. Again, that's the bond's current selling price. The payment on the bond, the annual coupon, we'll enter in as our annuity cash flow in our financial calculator. And then in addition to the $70 a year we get for 10 years, we'll also get $1,000, the face value or par value at maturity. And then we can solve for the yield. And in this case, we have a 7% yield to maturity. If the bond was selling at a slightly higher price, let's say $1,050, we would say the bond is selling at a premium that's above its par value. And not surprising, as the price goes up, our interest rate or yield decreases. One thing you should note about a bond, the $70 annual coupon remains constant. It doesn't matter what happens to the bond price. It doesn't matter what happens to interest rates. That $70 is a promised cash flow, as is $1,000 face value. Now, the borrower may default and might not make that payment, but the payments remain fixed. So, as our selling price goes up, the amount we are willing to pay for the bond, the yield or return that we earn decreases. And go ahead and confirm this again. 10 years for the maturity in your calculator, the 1,100 as the price, and enter as a negative amount because that's what we're paying. And then the payment, the annual coupon, and the future value are both cash flows we get, so those should have the opposite sign. And then finally, solve for that yield to maturity. Now, on the other hand, if the bond was selling at a price below $1,000, we would say it's selling at a discount. And in this case, notice the yield that we're earning is higher than the coupon rate. So as the bond price goes down, the return we earn goes up. And again, we can think about that we're paying $900 for this promised sets of cash flow. We obviously have to be earning a higher return than if we had paid $1,000 for that same set of cash flows. So when a bond sells at its face value, we say it's selling at par. At a price above its face value, we say it's selling at a premium. And a price below its face value, it is said to be selling at a discount. Let's go ahead and take a look how we would value a semi-annual coupon bond. With a semi-annual coupon bond, instead of making an annual coupon payment of $70 a year, that's the annual coupon, it's going to make that $70 payment in 2 installments of $35 twice a year. So in the payment field in your financial calculator, we'll enter 35, which is that $70 annual coupon divided by 2. Now the number of periods for our annuity cash flow is now 20. That's our 10 years multiplied by 2. We've got 20 semi-annual coupon payments. We receive the same $1,000 at maturity, and if we were paying a $1,000 for the bond, we would solve for a semi-annual rate or yield of 3.5%. And then we multiply that by 2 to get the 7% yield to maturity. And once again, if we pay a price higher than the par value, the bond will sell at a premium and we'll earn less than the 7% coupon rate. And if the bond sells at a price below face value, we say it sells at a discount and we will earn a yield that's higher than the 7% coupon rate. In terms of bond markets, bonds are bought and sold on a daily basis, much like shares of stock, and the prices get bid up and the prices get bid down. And depending on the price someone's willing to pay for a bond, that determines their yield. However, quite often in this chapter, we will be given a bond yield. Say we have a certain required rate of return we want to earn, and the question becomes, what would we be willing to pay for that bond? Let's go ahead and take a look at how we would solve for a bond price if we're given a yield. Let's consider the same $70 annual coupon bond by Walmart. And let's assume that we would be willing to lend money to Walmart at a 5% rate of return. Well, what does that mean regarding how much we would be willing to pay for the bond? Again, the payment is the $70 annual coupon. The $1,000 face value or par value is the future value of a bond. We'll enter 5% in the yield or interest rate field of our financial calculator. The bond matures in 10 years. And finally, we would solve for the present value. And if we were willing to lend Walmart money at 5% and they had a bond that was paying a 7% annual coupon, it looks like a pretty good bond, and we would bid the price up. We would bid the price up to $1,154, and we would say this bond sells at a premium. Again, if we were willing to accept a lower yield, that means we would be willing to pay more for the price for the bond. If, on the other hand, for some reason we weren't willing to lend money to Walmart at 4% or 5%, but we required a 10% rate of return, then this bond doesn't look like a very good investment since it only has a $70 or 7% annual coupon. Thus, not a very good bond to buy, not a lot of demand, and the price would fall until it reached $816, and we would say this bond sells at a discount. So again, we can be given a yield to maturity that we require and solve for a bond price, or we can be given a bond price and that determines the yield that we earn on a particular bond. Let's go ahead and consider and compare two bonds. In this example, we have Walmart promising to pay us $70 a year for 10 years and a $1,000 face value. And we also have the city of Detroit making that same promise. Now, if we thought both of these promises were worth just as much, in other words, each one had the same likelihood of default, or likelihood, we should maybe perhaps say, of not defaulting on their promise, and everything else was the same, we perceive them to have the same risk, both bonds would sell at the same price. And if that price was $1,000, then the yield that we would earn, the yield to maturity, would exactly equal the 7% promised coupon. My guess, though, is if you were given a choice between buying a Walmart bond that promised $70 a year for 10 years, or a bond from the city of Detroit, which has recently filed for bankruptcy, of $70 a year for 10 years, most of us would rather buy the Walmart bond. So, as demand for the Walmart bond goes up, the price of the Walmart bond will get bid up. If no one wants to buy the Detroit bond, its price will go down. So the Detroit bond will sell at a discount, and the Walmart bond will sell at a premium. And again, if we enter in the present value, the price of the bond, the annual coupon, and the face value and the maturity, we can solve for the yield on both bonds. And if the Walmart bond were selling for $1,100, this means that investors were willing to lend money to Walmart at 5.663%. On the other hand, if no one really wanted to buy the Detroit City bond and its price got bid down to $900, it would be forced to pay a higher yield. Investors require a higher rate of return for the increased perceived risk. If no one was really willing to buy the Detroit bond and demand really went down and the price continued to drop to, say, $600, this would result in a 14.95% yield to maturity. But again, you aren't guaranteed to earn that yield unless the city of Detroit comes through and makes all of the coupon payments and the $1,000 face value payment when the bond matures in 10 years. Since this is a risky proposition, in order for you to accept it, you're going to demand a much higher yield than you would from a similar promise from Walmart.